The moment I found that boarding pass in Marcus's jeans pocket, everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled like sand through my fingers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really began, 3 months earlier, when I was still naive enough to believe that 15 years of marriage meant something. If you're watching this from your kitchen table, your bedroom, or wherever you find yourself questioning everything you thought was true, leave a comment below and let me know where you're from. Because what I'm about to tell you could happen to anyone, anywhere. And if my story helps even one person see the signs I missed, then reliving this nightmare will have been worth it. My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. 3 months ago, I was a devoted wife and mother living what I thought was a picture-perfect life in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. I had a beautiful 10-year-old daughter named Emma, a husband I'd loved since college, and a cozy 4-bedroom house with a white picket fence that I'd helped design from the ground up. I worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, which gave me the flexibility to be there for Emma's soccer games, school plays, and everything in between. Marcus worked in commercial real estate development, traveling occasionally for work but always coming home to us with stories and small gifts from whatever city he'd visited. Or so I thought. The first red flag should have been the way he started guarding his phone like it contained state secrets. Marcus had never been possessive of his device before. We'd always had each other's passcodes, used each other's phones interchangeably when one was charging or out of reach. But sometime in early January, I noticed he'd changed his lock screen to a complex pattern instead of the simple 4-digit code we both knew. When I asked about it casually while we were watching Netflix one evening, he shrugged and said something about enhanced security after his company had a data breach. It seemed reasonable. Marcus was always conscientious about work matters. The second red flag was the gym membership. My husband, who had spent our entire marriage claiming he got enough exercise walking around construction sites and playing weekend basketball with his brother Jake, suddenly announced he'd joined CrossFit. He started leaving for work an hour earlier to hit the gym, coming home with wet hair and that particular glow people get after an intense workout. I was thrilled, honestly. At 36, Marcus had been complaining about his expanding waistline and the way his back ached after long days. I encouraged him, bought him new workout clothes, even suggested we make it a family activity. He declined. Said he needed this one thing that was just for him, his time to clear his head and push his limits. Again, it seemed reasonable. We all need our outlets, right? The third red flag, and this one should have sent me running, was the way he started picking fights over the smallest things. Marcus had always been even-tempered, the calm to my occasional storm. But suddenly, everything I did irritated him. I loaded the dishwasher wrong. I bought the wrong brand of coffee. I was too loud on phone calls with my sister Rebecca. I wasn't supportive enough of his new fitness journey. I was too involved in Emma's school activities. The criticism came daily, delivered in that particular tone that made me feel like I was failing at everything. Looking back now, I realize he was creating distance, manufacturing reasons to justify what he was already doing behind my back. He was rewriting our history in his mind, turning me into the nagging wife who didn't understand him, who held him back, who deserved whatever was coming. But in the moment, I internalized every criticism. I tried harder. I bit my tongue when he snapped at me for humming while I cooked dinner. I stopped talking to my sister as frequently. I gave him space when he claimed he needed to work late more often. I bent myself into a pretzel trying to be the wife he seemed to want, not realizing that no version of me would ever be enough because the problem wasn't me, it was that he'd already checked out of our marriage and into someone else's bed. The fourth red flag was the cologne. Marcus had worn the same cologne since our sophomore year of college, a woody, familiar scent that I associated with comfort and home. One evening in late February, he came home smelling like something entirely different. Something expensive and sharp and completely foreign. When I mentioned it, he said his old cologne had run out and the department store clerk had recommended this new one. He seemed defensive about it, which struck me as odd. It was just cologne, after all. But it wasn't just cologne. It was another piece of the elaborate lie he was constructing, another way he was transforming himself for someone who wasn't me. The fighting escalated through March. Marcus started staying out later, claiming work dinners and client meetings that seemed to multiply by the week. He'd come home after Emma was asleep, citing the demands of a major project that required late-night planning sessions. I tried to be understanding. Real estate development was a demanding field, and Marcus had always been ambitious. But there was something different about these absences, a secretiveness that hadn't existed before. He stopped sharing details about his work, which used to be a major topic of our dinner conversations. Marcus had always been passionate about his projects, eager to describe the challenges of zoning laws and architectural constraints and budget negotiations. Suddenly, his work life became a black box. When I asked questions, he'd give vague answers and change the subject. Emma started noticing too. My daughter had always been perceptive, but children have a way of sensing emotional undercurrents that adults try to hide. She began asking why Daddy seemed angry all the time, why he didn't watch movies with us on Sunday nights anymore, why he looked at his phone more than he looked at us during dinner. I made excuses. Daddy's working hard to provide for us. Daddy's stressed about an important project. Daddy loves us very much. He's just going through a difficult time at work. The lies came easily because I was telling them to myself too. If you've ever been in a marriage that's slowly dissolving, you know that gaslighting feeling I'm talking about. Hit the subscribe button if this story is resonating with you, because it's about to get so much worse, and I need to know I'm not alone in this. The discovery that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening in early April. Marcus was in the shower after another late night at the office, and his jeans were crumpled on our bedroom floor. I was gathering laundry, a mundane domestic task I'd performed thousands of times over the years. As I picked up his pants, something crinkled in the back pocket. I almost didn't look. Privacy in marriage is important, and I'd never been the type of wife who went through her husband's belongings. But something, intuition, suspicion, or maybe just divine intervention, made me reach into that pocket. It was a boarding pass stub. Delta Airlines, Charlotte to Miami, departing the previous Tuesday. The seat assignment was 12A, and there was another boarding pass stub underneath it, same flight, seat 12B. My hands started shaking as the implications hit me. Marcus had told me he was in Colombia that Tuesday, meeting with developers about a mixed-use project. He'd even called me from his hotel room, describing the view of the Congaree River and complaining about the bland room service. But according to this boarding pass, he'd been in Miami. And he hadn't been alone. The shower was still running. I stood there in our bedroom, holding proof of my husband's deception, feeling like the floor had opened up beneath my feet. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never caught him in a lie this elaborate. This wasn't a white lie about working late or exaggerating a work story. This was a carefully constructed alternate reality. I quickly took pictures of both boarding passes with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to attempt several shots before getting clear images. Then I put them back exactly where I'd found them and finished gathering the laundry as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed. Marcus emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, humming that new song he'd been playing constantly, some indie track I didn't recognize but that he claimed he'd heard on the radio. He kissed my forehead absently, the same gesture he'd made thousands of times before, but now it felt like a betrayal all its own. I went through the motions of our evening routine. I helped Emma with her math homework while Marcus watched the news. We ate dinner together, discussing Emma's upcoming field trip and weekend plans with a normalcy that felt surreal. I tucked Emma into bed, reading her 2 chapters of the fantasy novel we were working through together. I brushed my teeth and washed my face and climbed into bed next to the man I'd loved for more than half my adult life, the man who was living a double life I was only beginning to understand. That night, while Marcus slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd discovered. The boarding passes were just evidence of something I'd felt building for months. The distance, the criticism, the secrecy, the way he looked at me sometimes like I was a stranger he was barely tolerating. My husband was having an affair. Sleep became impossible after that Thursday night. I'd lie awake listening to Marcus breathe beside me, studying the familiar rhythm I'd fallen asleep to for 15 years, wondering how long he'd been coming home to me after spending his days with someone else. The man I'd built my entire adult life around had become a stranger, and I was living with an imposter who wore his face and spoke in his voice but held none of his loyalty or love. The next morning, I waited until Marcus left for work and Emma caught the school bus before I allowed myself to fall apart. I sat on our kitchen floor, still in my pajamas, and sobbed until there were no tears left. The boarding passes felt like evidence of my own stupidity as much as his betrayal. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? But grief, I learned, has a way of crystallizing into something harder when you're not ready to be a victim. After 20 minutes of crying, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just going to confront Marcus with 2 boarding pass stubs and hope for an honest explanation. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. I needed proof. I started with his credit card statements. Marcus handled most of our finances, but we had a joint account that I had full access to through online banking. I'd never had reason to scrutinize the charges before. We trusted each other, lived within our means, discussed major purchases. But trust, once broken, becomes a luxury you can't afford. Going through 3 months of credit card statements felt like archaeological work, uncovering layers of deception I'd been too trusting to notice in real time. The charges painted a picture that made me nauseous. February 14th, Valentine's Day. While I'd received a hastily purchased grocery store bouquet and a generic card that he'd clearly grabbed at the last minute, there was a $347 charge at Tiffany & Company. I'd never received any jewelry from Tiffany. The same day, there was a $156 charge at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place Marcus and I hadn't been to in years because we were always trying to save money for Emma's college fund and home improvements. March 8th, a $89 charge at Victoria's Secret. I hadn't shopped at Victoria's Secret since before Emma was born. My post-pregnancy body and our practical budget had shifted my lingerie purchases to Target and department store sales. But someone was receiving expensive lingerie, and it wasn't me. March 23rd, another restaurant charge, this one for $203 at a steakhouse in Uptown Charlotte. That was the night Marcus claimed he was working late on project proposals. I remembered because Emma had asked if we could wait for Daddy before starting movie night, and I told her he wouldn't be home until after her bedtime. The pattern continued through April. Hotel charges in cities where he'd claimed to be staying at corporate housing. Restaurant bills for 2 when he was supposedly traveling alone for work. Charges at stores and boutiques that suggested someone with very different tastes than mine was being treated to shopping sprees. Each discovery felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. This was a systematic betrayal that had been going on for months, funded by our joint account, planned around his family obligations, hidden beneath layers of lies that he delivered with the same face he used to tell Emma bedtime stories. But the credit card statements were just numbers on a screen. I needed more. I found myself doing things I'd never imagined I'd be capable of. I started paying attention to his phone in ways that felt invasive and necessary in equal measure. I noticed when he stepped outside to take calls, claiming they were work-related but speaking in a tone I'd never heard him use with colleagues. I watched him text with an intensity and frequency that our 15-year relationship had never inspired, his face lighting up at incoming messages in a way that made my stomach turn. When Marcus was in the shower, I tried accessing his phone, but the new pattern lock held firm. I attempted a few combinations, Emma's birthday, our anniversary, his birthday, but nothing worked. He'd chosen a code that had nothing to do with our life together. The realization hit me like a physical blow. His lock screen wasn't about work security. It was about keeping me out. I considered hiring a private investigator, but our finances were tight enough that a large unexplained expense would raise questions. I thought about confronting him directly, but some instinct held me back. I was dealing with a man who'd been lying to me for months with apparent ease. If I showed my hand too early, he'd just become better at hiding. So I became my own detective. I started paying attention to patterns. Marcus claimed his CrossFit classes were Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, but his gym bag was often missing on Tuesdays and Thursdays too. When I drove past his gym on a Thursday afternoon while running errands, his car wasn't in the parking lot. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of credit card charges, photos of receipts I found in his pockets, notes about his claimed schedule versus his actual whereabouts. It felt paranoid and desperate, but I was building a case against my own husband, gathering evidence of the dismantling of my marriage. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy around Emma. My daughter had always been sensitive to emotional undercurrents, and I could see her watching me with concern when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd ask if I was okay when she found me staring off into space, or why I seemed sad when I thought I was hiding it well. I couldn't tell her that her father was destroying our family. I couldn't burden her with the knowledge that her hero was living a double life. So I forced smiles and maintained routines and died a little inside every time she talked excitedly about planning something special for Daddy's upcoming birthday. 2 weeks into my investigation, I made a decision that still makes me queasy to remember. I installed tracking software on Marcus's laptop. It felt like a violation of everything I'd believed about trust and privacy in marriage. But I was past the point of moral high ground. I needed to know what I was dealing with, and my husband had proven himself to be a masterful liar. The software was designed for parents monitoring their children's internet usage, but it served my purposes perfectly. What I discovered made the credit card charges look innocent. Hours of video calls with someone named Diane. Hundreds of text messages filled with intimate details and future plans that had nothing to do with me or Emma. Hotel bookings for romantic getaways. Research into divorce attorneys and asset protection. Flight bookings for trips that were definitely not business-related. But the worst part, the detail that shattered what was left of my heart, was the way he talked about me in those messages. I wasn't just being cheated on, I was being mocked. Dismissed. Described as boring, clingy, sexually uninteresting. A burden he was planning to shed as soon as he figured out how to minimize the financial impact. He called me the ball and chain. He joked about my post-pregnancy body and my focus on motherhood. He complained about my cooking, my conversation, my lack of ambition. He described our marriage as something he'd outgrown, something that was holding him back from the life he deserved. Reading those messages felt like being skinned alive. This wasn't just infidelity, it was character assassination. He wasn't just betraying me. He was rewriting our entire relationship to justify his actions to someone who was helping him destroy the life we'd built together. And Diane, God, Diane was encouraging every word. She wasn't some innocent woman who'd been lied to about his marital status. She knew about me and Emma. She knew he was married, and she didn't care. In fact, she seemed to enjoy the drama of being the other woman, the excitement of stolen moments and secret messages. They were planning a future together. Marcus was going to file for divorce after a big project completed in June. He'd already consulted with attorneys about hiding assets and minimizing alimony payments. They'd looked at apartments in Miami, where Diane lived, researched schools for Emma in case he got custody, though the messages made it clear he had no intention of fighting for significant parenting time. He was going to abandon us. Financially, emotionally, practically. He was planning to blow up our family and skip town with his mistress, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life he'd systematically dismantled while pretending to be my loving husband. If you're still watching, and you've ever felt that gut punch moment when you realize someone you trusted completely has been planning your destruction, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. I need to know I'm not alone in this, because the story gets so much darker from here. But I wasn't just going to be a victim. Not anymore. The next phase of my investigation began accidentally, through Emma's innocent question about Daddy's travel schedule. We were making a calendar for her school project, marking important family events and dates, when she asked why Daddy had been going to Miami so much for work when his company usually sent him to cities in North Carolina and South Carolina. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, sweetheart? Emma, focused on coloring in the days of the month with different colored markers, said matter-of-factly, you know, like when he goes to Miami for meetings. He's been there a bunch of times. He brought me that pretty shell from the beach there last month. I remembered that shell. Marcus had presented it to Emma one evening after another supposed business trip to Colombia, telling her he'd found it at a gift shop and thought she'd like it. But gift shops in Columbia, South Carolina don't typically carry shells from Miami beaches. My 10-year-old daughter had just unknowingly confirmed what I already suspected. Marcus's business trips were covers for romantic getaways with Diane. That evening, after Emma was in bed, I did something that still makes me feel sick to remember. I went through Marcus's suitcase, the black roller bag he used for work travel. Hidden in a side pocket I'd never had reason to explore, I found a collection of items that painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize. Hotel keycards from luxury resorts in Miami, Savannah, and Asheville. Receipts for couples' spa treatments and romantic dinners. A small jewelry box containing diamond earrings that I'd never seen before. Business cards from high-end boutiques and art galleries. A handwritten note in feminine handwriting that said, "Can't wait for our weekend in the mountains. You make me feel alive. D." But the most devastating discovery was a printed email confirmation for a week-long trip to Turks and Caicos. The reservation was for 2 adults, departing the following month. The dates coincided perfectly with Emma's spring break, when Marcus had told me he needed to work through her vacation because of a critical project deadline. He wasn't just cheating on me during business trips. He was planning elaborate vacations with his mistress while telling me we couldn't afford a family trip to the beach this year. I photographed everything and returned the items exactly as I'd found them. But something had fundamentally shifted in me that night. The grief and shock were crystallizing into something harder and more focused. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was gathering intelligence on an enemy who happened to share my bed. The confrontation came sooner than I'd planned, and it didn't happen the way I'd imagined. It was a Tuesday evening in late April. Marcus had claimed he needed to work late again, another client dinner that would keep him out past Emma's bedtime. Emma and I had spent the evening baking cookies for her class party, and she'd saved 2 of the best ones in a special container for Daddy to find when he got home. Marcus walked through the door at 11:47 p.m., and I could smell Diane's perfume on him from across the room. "How was the client dinner?" I asked from the couch, where I'd been pretending to watch Netflix while actually tracking his location through the family phone plan. According to the GPS, his phone had spent the evening at an apartment complex in South Charlotte, not at any restaurant. "Long," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Richards is considering the Morrison project, but has got concerns about the timeline." It was a lie delivered with the same casual tone he used to discuss weekend plans or grocery lists. The ease of his deception was almost more infuriating than the cheating itself. "That's funny," I said, setting down the wine I'd been nursing all evening. "Because Emma wanted to call you during dinner to tell you about the cookies we made, but when I tried your number, it went straight to voicemail." Marcus paused in the act of loosening his tie. "Phone must have died. You know how long those dinners can run." Another lie. Another casual dismissal of my intelligence and intuition. "Strange that it died," I continued, my voice staying level despite the rage building in my chest. "Because the family phone plan shows your location all evening. Interesting that Richards chose to have dinner at the Meridian apartment complex instead of a restaurant." The color drained from Marcus's face. For just a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw panic in his eyes. But then he regrouped, and the expression that replaced the panic was worse than the lies. It was contempt. "Are you tracking my phone now, Sarah? What's next? Hiring a private investigator?" This is exactly why. He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air between us. "Exactly why what, Marcus?" He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just annoyance or frustration, but actual disgust. "Nothing. I'm not doing this right now. I'm tired." "We're doing this right now," I said, standing up. "We're finally doing this right now. Where were you tonight? And don't lie to me again." The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. Marcus stood in our entryway, still in his suit, looking like he was calculating his options. Finally, he made a decision that destroyed what was left of our marriage. "You want to know where I was? I was with someone who actually wants to be around me. Someone who doesn't track my phone or go through my pockets or make me feel like a criminal for working late. Someone who appreciates what I do for this family instead of constantly questioning it." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. After months of lies and gaslighting, he'd finally told the truth, and it was worse than anything I'd imagined. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was defiant. "How long?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Does it matter? It matters to me. Marcus sat down heavily in the armchair across from me, suddenly looking older than his 36 years. Since January. 4 months. 4 months of lies, manipulation, and financial betrayal. 4 months of coming home to me after spending his days with someone else. 4 months of kissing Emma goodnight while planning to abandon her. What's her name? Sarah, please. What's her name? Diane. Her name is Diane. The name I already knew felt different spoken aloud in our living room. It gave weight to the woman who'd been a shadow in credit card statements and text messages. She was real, and she'd been in my life for months without my knowing it. Are you in love with her? This time, Marcus's pause told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. Yes. That single word destroyed 15 years of marriage, 10 years of parenthood, and a lifetime of plans we'd made together. It destroyed the family Emma believed in and the future I'd been working toward every day since I was 19 years old. But it also freed me from any remaining obligation to protect him from the consequences of his choices. I want you out, I said. Sarah, we need to talk about this rationally. There are logistics to consider. Emma, the house, our finances. I want you out tonight. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house too. We can figure out a civilized way to handle this. And that's when I realized Marcus didn't understand what he was dealing with. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought he could manage this situation the same way he managed everything else, with calm logic and strategic planning and the assumption that I would ultimately be reasonable and accommodating. He thought I was still the woman who'd spent months bending herself into knots trying to save a marriage he'd already abandoned. Get out, I repeated. Be realistic, Sarah. I'm not leaving Emma, and I'm not giving up my house because you can't handle. I walked to the kitchen and returned with our laptop, already open to the screenshots I'd taken of his messages with Diane. His face went white as he recognized his own words displayed on the screen. This is what you really think of me? I asked, reading directly from his messages. Sarah's let herself go since Emma was born. No ambition, no passion. She's become exactly the kind of suburban mom I never wanted to end up with. Marcus reached for the laptop, but I pulled it away. The sex is boring, the conversation is boring, everything about coming home to her is boring. I can't wait to be free of this life. Sarah, those messages, they don't represent how I really feel. I was venting, I was. You were planning to divorce me and hide assets so I'd get as little as possible in the settlement. You've consulted with 3 different attorneys. You've researched moving to Miami with Diane. You've already mentally moved out of this marriage. The evidence was overwhelming, and Marcus finally stopped trying to deny it. Instead, he did something that revealed his true character more clearly than any affair could have. He attacked. You want to know the truth? Fine. I am planning to leave. This marriage has been dead for years, but you've been too busy playing perfect mother to notice. Diane makes me feel like a man again, like I'm worth something. She's successful, she's independent, she challenges me intellectually. She's everything you used to be before you gave up on yourself. Each word was calculated to wound, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly where my insecurities lived. But instead of breaking me, his cruelty crystallized something inside me. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. This was a stranger who looked like my husband but felt none of his love or loyalty. Pack a bag, I said quietly. You have 30 minutes. I'm not going anywhere. That's when I played my final card, the one I'd hoped I wouldn't need to use. Marcus, I know about the credit card fraud. His face went completely still. Diane's ring, her shopping sprees, your romantic vacations, they've all been funded from our joint account without my knowledge or consent. That's financial fraud in North Carolina. I have documentation going back 4 months. Emma's college fund has been depleted to pay for your affair. This was the truth that even I had just discovered that afternoon, going through our savings accounts and investment statements. Marcus hadn't just been cheating, he'd been stealing from our daughter's future to fund his new relationship. You're taking money from Emma's education to buy jewelry for your mistress. How do you think that's going to look in divorce court? How do you think it's going to look to your employer when I file a police report for theft? Marcus's defiance finally crumbled. He'd been caught, documented, and cornered. More importantly, he'd underestimated the woman he'd been systematically betraying for months. 29 minutes, I said, looking at my phone. And Marcus, if you ever speak to me again the way you just did, if you ever try to make me feel small or worthless or responsible for your choices, I will destroy you in ways you can't even imagine. You've forgotten who you're dealing with. As he packed his bag in our bedroom, the bedroom where he'd lied to me every night for months, I sat at our kitchen table and began planning the next phase of my life. The grief would come later. The healing would take time. But first, I had work to do. Marcus thought he'd been managing our separation on his timeline, according to his plan. He thought he could control the narrative and minimize the consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Marcus left that night, but not quietly. As he packed his suitcase in our bedroom, he kept up a steady stream of justifications and accusations that revealed just how much contempt he'd been harboring beneath his mask of civility. "This is what you do, Sarah," he said, throwing dress shirts into his bag with aggressive force. "You manipulate situations to make yourself the victim. You can't just accept that people grow apart, that marriages sometimes end. You have to make it dramatic and personal." I stood in the doorway, watching this man I'd loved for 15 years transform into someone completely unrecognizable. "I'm manipulating the situation? You've been living a double life for 4 months. I've been trying to figure out how to end this marriage without destroying Emma's life," he shot back. "But you're going to make sure that's impossible now, aren't you? You're going to drag us both through a bitter divorce because your pride is hurt." The audacity was breathtaking. He'd planned our divorce in secret, consulted attorneys behind my back, stolen from our daughter's college fund, and psychologically abused me for months, but I was the one making things difficult by refusing to go along with his timeline. "Where are you going tonight?" I asked. "Jake's place." His brother Jake lived across town in a bachelor pad that smelled like beer and hadn't been properly cleaned since the Clinton administration. The idea of my soon-to-be ex-husband sleeping on that couch felt like cosmic justice. For how long? Until I figure out a more permanent arrangement. He zipped up his suitcase and turned to face me. "Sarah, I need you to promise me something. Don't tell Emma about this tonight. She doesn't need to know the details, and I want to be the one to explain that Daddy's going to be living somewhere else for a while." Even in the middle of his departure, Marcus was trying to control the narrative. He wanted to be the one to spin the story for Emma, to position himself as the reasonable parent who was handling a difficult situation maturely. "What are you going to tell her?" "The truth. That sometimes adults need space to work on their problems." I almost laughed at the euphemism. "Is that what you call it? Working on your problems?" "Sarah, please. Emma is the most important thing in both our lives. Whatever else is happening between us, we have to put her first." This from the man who'd been planning to move to Miami and see his daughter every other weekend if it was convenient. "Don't lecture me about putting Emma first," I said. "You lost that right when you started stealing from her college fund." Marcus flinched, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he picked up his suitcase and walked past me toward the front door. At the threshold, he turned back with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I did love you once," he said quietly. "I need you to know that. This isn't about punishing you or hurting you. I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been happy for a long time. And Diane makes me feel like myself again." It was probably meant to be kind, this parting attempt at honesty, but it felt like another knife wound. He was telling me that our entire life together, raising Emma, building our home, creating traditions and memories and a family, had been making him unhappy. That I had been making him unhappy, just by being myself. After he left, I sat in our living room surrounded by the remnants of the life we'd built together. Emma's art projects on the refrigerator, family photos on the mantel, the couch where we'd watched countless movies and had thousands of conversations about everything and nothing. It all felt like evidence of a lie now, props in a performance Marcus had been giving for months or maybe years. But I couldn't afford to wallow. Emma would wake up in 7 hours expecting a normal Thursday morning, expecting both her parents to be there for breakfast and school preparation. I needed a plan. I started with practical matters. I changed all our account passwords and enabled alerts for any new charges on our credit cards. I made a list of all our shared assets and started researching divorce attorneys in Charlotte. I documented everything, screenshots, photos, bank statements, credit card records, and stored it all in a secure cloud account that Marcus couldn't access. Then I did something that felt both necessary and terrifying. I started researching Diane. It's amazing what you can learn about someone from social media when you're motivated. Diane Richards, 31 years old, senior marketing manager at a luxury hotel chain based in Miami. Divorced, no children, originally from Atlanta. Her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of professional headshots, beach photos, and pictures of expensive meals and designer handbags. But more importantly, it was a timeline of her relationship with my husband. The photos were subtle at first, group shots at restaurants where Marcus's reflection was visible in a window, couples' hands holding drinks where one set of hands was clearly his, shadow selfies on beaches where the second shadow was distinctly Marcus-shaped. As her confidence grew, the evidence became more blatant. Recent posts showed expensive jewelry that I recognized from our credit card statements, flowers delivered to her office, weekend getaway photos from locations Marcus had claimed to be visiting for work. The most recent post, dated just 3 days earlier, was a photo of her hand wearing a diamond tennis bracelet with the caption, "Sometimes the best gifts come from the most unexpected places." #blessed, #spoiled, #living my best life. That bracelet had cost $2,847 according to our Visa statement. Money that should have been going toward Emma's braces, which we'd been putting off because of budget constraints. But the most infuriating discovery was in her tagged photos, where friends had posted pictures from various events and gatherings. In several photos from the past 2 months, Diane was wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Marcus claimed had been stolen during a break-in at his office 3 weeks ago. I'd cried over that necklace, which had been my only inheritance from Grandma Rose. I'd filed a police report for the theft. My husband hadn't just stolen money from our family. He'd stolen my most precious heirloom and given it to his mistress to wear to parties with her friends. Looking at those photos, seeing Diane laughing and posing in jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about a systematic campaign to humiliate and destroy me while elevating the woman who was helping him do it. I took screenshots of everything and added them to my growing file of evidence. But documentation wasn't enough anymore. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and that meant learning more about both of them. The next morning, after Emma left for school and I'd managed to convince her that Daddy had left early for a work trip, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I drove to Diane's workplace. The luxury hotel where she worked was in uptown Charlotte, a gleaming 40-story tower with a marble lobby and doormen in uniforms that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a stalker but needing to see her with my own eyes. She emerged at 12:15 p.m., exactly when someone would leave for lunch. Diane was beautiful in the way that required significant time and money to maintain, perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, designer clothes that fit like they'd been tailored specifically for her body. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether she deserved the best of everything. But more than her appearance, it was her demeanor that struck me. She checked her phone constantly, smiling at messages with the satisfied expression of someone who believed she'd won something valuable. She walked into an expensive restaurant with the easy entitlement of someone accustomed to being treated well, being chosen, being prioritized. Watching her, I understood something about my husband's attraction that went beyond physical appeal. Diane represented everything Marcus thought he was missing: youth, independence, success, freedom from the compromises and responsibilities of family life. She was his midlife crisis wrapped in designer clothes and expensive perfume. But she was also complicit. The messages I'd read made it clear that she knew about me and Emma. She knew she was destroying a family, and she didn't care. In fact, she seemed to enjoy the drama of it all, the excitement of being chosen over the boring wife and mother. That afternoon, while Emma was at soccer practice, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. But not in the way Marcus expected. He thought he understood me, the accommodating wife who'd spent months trying to save a marriage he'd already abandoned. He expected me to be hurt and angry but ultimately reasonable. He expected me to negotiate, to compromise, to prioritize Emma's stability over my own sense of justice. He was wrong. I started by consulting with 3 different divorce attorneys, not because I needed 3 opinions, but because I wanted to ensure that Marcus couldn't hire any of them. In North Carolina, an attorney who's consulted with one spouse in a divorce case can't represent the other spouse, even if no formal agreement was signed. I was eliminating his options while exploring mine. The second attorney I met with, Patricia Holbrook, was a formidable woman in her 50s who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving financial fraud. Her office was decorated with diplomas, awards, and photos of her with various political figures, visual evidence of her success and connections. "Mrs. Anderson," she said after reviewing the documents I'd brought, "you have an extremely strong case. The financial fraud alone could result in criminal charges, and the evidence of asset dissipation during the marriage will work heavily in your favor in property division." What about Emma? North Carolina courts prioritize the best interests of the child, but infidelity and financial misconduct can impact custody decisions, especially when marital funds have been used to support the affair. Your husband's actions demonstrate poor judgment and a willingness to prioritize his relationship with his mistress over his family's financial security. Patricia leaned back in her leather chair and studied me carefully. "May I ask what outcome you're hoping for?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about constantly since Marcus left. "I want him to understand that actions have consequences," I said. "He's spent months treating me like an obstacle to his happiness, something to be managed and eventually discarded. He's stolen from our daughter's future to fund his affair. He's lied to me, manipulated me, and tried to make me feel like I was losing my mind. I want him to face the full consequences of those choices." Patricia nodded. "We can certainly make sure he does. But I have to warn you, high-conflict divorces can be expensive, emotionally draining, and hard on children. Sometimes it's worth considering whether the satisfaction of making him pay is worth the cost to your family." "He made that choice when he decided to blow up our family for a woman in Miami," I replied. "I'm not starting this fight, but I'm sure as hell going to finish it." That evening, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, where's Dad? He wasn't at my soccer game, and he always comes to my games." We were sitting at the kitchen table, sharing a pizza because I hadn't had the mental energy to cook. Emma was still in her soccer uniform, grass stains on her knees and her hair falling out of the ponytail I'd helped her with that morning. "Dad and I are having some problems right now, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's staying at Uncle Jake's house while we figure some things out." Emma's face fell. At 10 years old, she was old enough to understand that parents having problems was serious, but not old enough to understand the complexities of what was happening. "Are you getting divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on the legal and financial aspects of what was happening that I'd almost forgotten the most important consequence: Emma's world was being destroyed. "I don't know yet, honey. We're trying to figure out what's best for everyone." "Is it because of me?" she asked in a small voice. "Did I do something wrong?" My heart shattered. This beautiful, innocent child was blaming herself for her father's choices. "Oh, sweetheart, no." I moved around the table and pulled her into my lap, something she usually claimed she was too old for but didn't resist tonight. "This has nothing to do with you. You are the best thing that ever happened to both of us, and nothing that's happening between Dad and me is your fault." "Then why is he gone?" How do you explain adult selfishness and betrayal to a 10-year-old? How do you tell your child that her hero has feet of clay without destroying her ability to trust and love? Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, I said carefully. It doesn't mean they stop loving those people, but it does mean there are consequences for those choices. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with a seriousness that had always made her seem older than her years. Will I still see Dad? Of course you will. No matter what happens between Dad and me, he will always be your father and he will always love you. I hoped that was true. Based on the messages I'd read, Marcus's post-divorce plans didn't include significant parenting time, but I couldn't tell Emma that. She needed to believe in her father's love for as long as possible. That night, after Emma was asleep, my phone rang. Marcus. We need to talk, he said without preamble. We talked last night. Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said, about the credit cards and Emma's college fund. I know how it looks, but… How it looks? Marcus, you stole from our daughter. I borrowed from our joint accounts to help Diane through a difficult financial situation. I was planning to pay it back before you even noticed. The audacity was breathtaking. He was still trying to reframe theft as a loan, betrayal as kindness, destruction as problem-solving. When were you planning to pay it back? Before or after you divorced me and moved to Miami? Silence. I know about your consultations with divorce attorneys, I continued. I know about your plans to hide assets and minimize alimony. I know about the apartment you looked at with Diane and the schools you researched for Emma in Florida, though we both know you had no intention of actually taking custody of her. More silence. Sarah, how do you know all this? The same way I know about my grandmother's pearl necklace, which you reported stolen but actually gave to your mistress. The same way I know about the Turks and Caicos vacation you booked during Emma's spring break while telling me we couldn't afford a family trip. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably realizing for the first time how much evidence I'd gathered, how thoroughly his lies had been exposed. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you to understand that I'm not the naive, accommodating wife you've been lying to for 4 months. I want you to know that there will be consequences for what you've done to this family. And I want you to stop calling me unless it's about Emma. Sarah, we can work this out. We don't have to make this ugly. You made it ugly when you decided to destroy our family for a woman who helps you mock your wife and daughter in text messages. Another long silence. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. But you did. Every day for 4 months. You looked me in the eye and lied to me. You made me question my sanity when I asked about your behavior. You stole from Emma's future and gave my grandmother's jewelry to another woman. You planned my humiliation and abandonment while pretending to be my loving husband. You don't get to claim you didn't want to hurt me when everything you did was designed to hurt me. What happens now? Now you find out what it feels like when someone you underestimated decides to stop being accommodating. I hung up without waiting for his response. The war Marcus had started with his deception was about to begin in earnest. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with the same woman who'd spent months trying to save their marriage. That woman was gone. What was left was someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become something else entirely. If you've ever reached that moment where you realize you're done being underestimated, done being taken advantage of, done accepting less than you deserve, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, everything changes. The turning point came 3 days later, when Marcus showed up at our house unannounced to collect more of his belongings. I was in the kitchen helping Emma with her homework when I heard his key in the front door, followed by his voice calling out like he still lived there. Sarah. I'm just grabbing some things from upstairs. Emma's face lit up. Daddy! She abandoned her math worksheet and ran toward the front hall. I followed, arriving just in time to see Marcus lift Emma in a bear hug that looked perfect from the outside, the devoted father reuniting with his beloved daughter. But I noticed things Emma couldn't see, the expensive watch I'd never seen before, the subtle smell of Diane's perfume still clinging to his clothes, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he looked at me over Emma's head. I missed you, monkey, he said. using the nickname he'd given Emma when she was 3. I missed you too. Are you coming home now? Mom said you and her are having problems, but you look happy, so maybe the problems are fixed. The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. Emma had spent the last 3 days being unusually helpful around the house, as if perfect behavior could somehow fix her parents' marriage. Marcus's eyes met mine, and I saw him calculating his response. I'm still staying at Uncle Jake's for a little while longer, but that doesn't mean I love you any less. How was school today? While Emma launched into a detailed account of her day, complete with playground drama and a substitute teacher who couldn't figure out the smartboard, I studied my husband with the clarity that comes from seeing someone's true nature. Marcus was performing fatherhood the same way he'd been performing marriage, hitting the right notes, saying the appropriate words, but emotionally absent in a way that Emma was too young to recognize. He was going through the motions because it was expected, because it maintained his image as a good father, because it would look better in divorce court. But his heart wasn't in it. His heart was in Miami with a woman who represented freedom from exactly these kinds of domestic obligations. After 20 minutes of listening to Emma chatter about friends and teachers and weekend plans, Marcus glanced at his phone and said, I need to grab some files from my office upstairs. Keep telling me about your story, Em. He headed toward the stairs, but instead of going to his home office, he turned toward our bedroom. I followed, leaving Emma to finish her homework. I found Marcus in our walk-in closet, not gathering work files but packing more clothes and personal items. He'd brought an additional suitcase. This wasn't a quick trip to grab something he'd forgotten. This was another stage of his departure. Find what you were looking for? I asked from the doorway. He didn't look up from folding dress shirts. I need more clothes if I'm going to be staying at Jake's indefinitely. Indefinitely. Sarah, we both know this marriage is over. I'm trying to handle this transition as smoothly as possible, for Emma's sake. For Emma's sake? You mean the daughter whose college fund you emptied to buy jewelry for your mistress? Marcus finally looked at me, and his expression was tired rather than angry. I know you're hurt. I know you have every right to be furious with me. But eventually, we're going to have to figure out how to coexist as Emma's parents. The hostility isn't helping anyone. The reasonableness of his tone was infuriating. He was trying to manage me again, trying to position himself as a mature adult dealing with his hysterical ex-wife. You're right, I said. Eventually, we will have to coexist as Emma's parents. But first, you're going to face the consequences of what you've done to this family. What does that mean? Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken that morning, Diane at her favorite lunch spot, wearing my grandmother's pearls while laughing with friends. Marcus went completely still. I filed an amended police report this morning, I said conversationally. Turns out my grandmother's necklace wasn't stolen from your office after all. The police were very interested to learn where it actually ended up. Sarah, you can't. I also had an interesting conversation with your boss, Robert Mitchell. He was surprised to learn that your recent business trips to Miami weren't actually business trips at all. Apparently, using company resources to conduct personal affairs violates several clauses in your employment contract. The color drained from Marcus's face. His job at the commercial real estate firm was the foundation of everything. Our mortgage, Emma's private school, our health insurance, his entire professional identity. You called my boss. I provided him with documentation showing that you've been claiming business expenses for personal travel, lying about your whereabouts on company time, and using your corporate credit card for unauthorized purchases. Robert was very thorough in his questions about your recent travel patterns. Marcus sat down heavily on our bed, the same bed where he'd lied to me for months while planning his escape with another woman. Why are you doing this? Because you thought you could destroy our family without consequences. You thought you could humiliate me, steal from Emma, and walk away to start fresh with Diane while I picked up the pieces of the life you shattered. You were wrong. I never wanted to hurt you or Emma. But you did. Every single day for 4 months. And now you're going to understand what it feels like to have your life turned upside down by someone you underestimated. Marcus looked at me with something approaching recognition. This isn't like you, Sarah. No, it's not. The Sarah you've been lying to, the one who tried to save our marriage while you planned its destruction, she's gone. You killed her when you chose Diane over your family. I left him sitting in our bedroom and returned to the kitchen, where Emma was struggling with a word problem about calculating the area of irregular shapes. Normal mother-daughter homework time, except nothing about our lives was normal anymore. 20 minutes later, Marcus came downstairs with his additional suitcase and a garbage bag full of items from his office. Emma looked up from her math worksheet hopefully. Are you staying for dinner, Daddy? Not tonight, monkey. But how about we plan something special for this weekend? Just you and me. Emma's face lit up. Really? What kind of special? Whatever you want. We could go to that trampoline place you love, or mini-golf, or maybe a movie. Can Mom come too? The question hung in the air like a grenade. Marcus glanced at me, and I could see him calculating how to answer without destroying Emma's hope while also maintaining his narrative about needing space. Mom and I are still working on our problems, he said finally. But you and I can have our own special day, okay? Emma's disappointment was visible, but she nodded. Okay. After Marcus left, Emma helped me clean up the dinner dishes with unusual quietness. Finally, as I was loading the dishwasher, she said, Mom, are you and Daddy going to be okay? It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one that crystallized what I needed to do next. I don't know, sweetheart. But I promise you that no matter what happens between your father and me, you will always be loved and taken care of. That will never change. What if you get divorced? Where would I live? You would live with me, in our house, and you would see Daddy regularly. Your life wouldn't change as much as you might think. Emma considered this. Rebecca's parents got divorced last year, and she says it's not as bad as she thought it would be. She gets 2 bedrooms now, and 2 birthday parties. The resilience of children never failed to amaze me. Emma was already trying to find silver linings in a situation that had demolished my entire understanding of my life. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop and began researching something I'd never imagined needing to know about: how to systematically dismantle someone's life the way they dismantled yours. The internet is a fascinating resource when you're motivated by righteous anger and have substantial evidence of wrongdoing. I learned about reporting procedures for employment violations, insurance fraud, tax evasion, and credit card misuse. I researched public records databases and social media investigation techniques. I studied North Carolina divorce laws and property division statutes. But most importantly, I learned about Diane's life in ways that would have been impossible before the age of social media. Diane's digital footprint was extensive and careless. Her Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter accounts painted a detailed picture of someone who shared everything online. I learned about her daily routines, her favorite restaurants, her weekend activities, her work schedule, her friend group, her family relationships, and her travel plans. More crucially, I learned about her weaknesses. Diane worked in luxury hospitality, an industry where reputation and discretion were paramount. Her LinkedIn profile emphasized her role in maintaining the hotel's elite clientele and exclusive events. She'd built her career on being trustworthy with sensitive information and maintaining the privacy of high-profile guests. She was also, according to her social media posts, extremely proud of her professional achievements and her carefully curated public image. She posted regularly about industry events, professional development seminars, and her company's awards and recognition. But the most interesting discovery was that Diane's hotel chain had recently been acquired by a larger hospitality company, one that had very strict policies about employee conduct and social media presence. The acquisition had brought new management, new standards, and new scrutiny of all existing employees. I spent 3 hours that night crafting a detailed, professional email to the hotel chain's corporate ethics department. I included screenshots of Diane's social media posts showing expensive gifts and luxury vacations that coincided with Marcus's business trips. I provided documentation showing that she'd been involved in a relationship with a married man who was using company resources and lying to his employer about his travel purposes. I outlined the potential liability issues for a luxury hotel chain whose marketing manager was publicly flaunting an affair with a client's spouse. I didn't send it that night. This was too important to rush, and I wanted to make sure my timing was perfect. Instead, I turned my attention to Marcus's vulnerabilities. His real estate firm prided itself on integrity and family values. Ironic, given that they'd employed someone who was stealing from his own daughter's college fund to finance an affair. But their website and marketing materials emphasized trust, honesty, and commitment to client relationships. I drafted another professional email, this one to the firm's senior partners, documenting Marcus's misuse of company resources and his pattern of lying about his business activities. I included evidence of his fraudulent expense reports and his use of business trips as covers for personal relationships. But I also did something else. I researched the firm's biggest clients and competitors. I learned about upcoming projects and partnership opportunities. I studied the local real estate market and identified key relationships that Marcus had built over his 8 years with the company. Knowledge, I was discovering, was the most powerful weapon available to someone who'd been systematically deceived and betrayed. By 2 a.m., I had a comprehensive understanding of both Marcus's and Diane's professional lives, social circles, and potential vulnerabilities. I had documented evidence of their affair, their financial fraud, and their professional misconduct. I had contact information for their employers, colleagues, friends, and family members. But more than that, I had a plan. Marcus thought he understood the consequences of his actions. He expected me to be hurt and angry, to make the divorce process difficult, to fight over custody and assets. He was prepared for that version of consequences, the predictable reactions of a betrayed spouse. He wasn't prepared for war. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I woke up with a sense of purpose. For the first time since discovering the boarding passes in Marcus's pocket, I felt like I had some control over what happened next. Emma noticed the change at breakfast. "You seem different today, Mom. Less sad." "I'm starting to figure some things out, sweetheart." "Good things." I smiled at my daughter, this beautiful child who deserved so much better than a father who would abandon her for a newer, more exciting life. "I think so. Sometimes when bad things happen, they help us understand what we're really capable of." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 10-year-old worldview. After she left for school, I sent the first email. The subject line read, "Professional conduct concerns regarding employee Diane Richards." And just like that, the real battle began. The response to my email came faster than I'd expected. Diane's hotel chain took employee conduct violations seriously, especially when they involved potential fraud and public relations risks. By Wednesday afternoon, I received a professional reply from their corporate ethics department requesting additional documentation and informing me that they were opening an internal investigation. But the real fireworks started Thursday morning when Diane called Marcus in a panic, and Marcus immediately called me. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Marcus." "Sarah, I'm serious. Diane just called me crying because her company is investigating her for ethics violations. They're questioning her about her social media posts and her relationship with me." "What did you tell them?" I was in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reviewing Emma's permission slip for an upcoming field trip. The normalcy of the morning routine felt surreal against the backdrop of the chaos I'd unleashed. "I told them the truth," I said calmly. "That their marketing manager is involved in a relationship with a married man who's been using his company's resources to fund their affair. That she's been posting evidence of expensive gifts and luxury vacations that coincide with fraudulent business travel. That she's in possession of stolen property. You're destroying her career over our personal problems." "No, Marcus. You destroyed her career when you involved her in fraud and theft. I just documented it." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We need to meet. Tonight, after Emma's asleep. This has gone far enough." "I agree. It has gone far enough. 6 months too far, actually." "Sarah, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you're making this impossible. If you keep attacking Diane, if you keep involving our employers and making this public, you're going to force me to take steps I don't want to take. What kind of steps? Legal steps. I have rights too, and I won't let you destroy my life because you're angry about the divorce. The threat was clear, but it didn't have the effect Marcus intended. Instead of intimidating me, it confirmed something I'd suspected. He still didn't understand what he was dealing with. Come over at 8, I said. We'll talk. But first, I had other preparations to make. I spent Thursday afternoon doing something I'd never imagined I'd need to do, preparing for a confrontation with my own husband like he was a hostile adversary rather than someone I'd once loved more than anyone else in the world. I printed out copies of everything: bank statements, credit card records, text message screenshots, social media posts, travel receipts, and hotel bookings. I organized it all into a comprehensive folder that documented not just his infidelity, but the systematic fraud he'd committed against our family. I also set up my phone to record our conversation. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other person. Given Marcus's recent tendency to rewrite history and gaslight me about his own actions, I wanted an accurate record of whatever happened next. Emma was unusually clingy that evening, as if she could sense the tension building in our house. She asked to read an extra chapter of our book together, then requested a second bedtime story, then claimed she was thirsty and needed water. Finally, at 7:45, she was settled in her room with a nightlight and her stuffed elephant, clutching it like a talisman against whatever instability she sensed in her world. Marcus arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, letting himself in with his key like he still lived there. But everything about his demeanor was different from his previous visit. Gone was the reasonable, slightly condescending tone he'd been using since our initial confrontation. He was angry now, and he wasn't trying to hide it. "We need to talk," he said, walking into our living room without waiting for an invitation. "That's what you said." I followed him, carrying my folder of evidence and my phone with its recording app already running. Marcus sat down on our couch, the couch where we'd cuddled while watching movies, where Emma had taken her first steps, where we'd planned family vacations and discussed our dreams for the future. Now he sat like a stranger, his posture rigid and confrontational. "You need to stop this campaign against Diane," he said without preamble. "She's done nothing wrong except fall in love with someone who was already unhappy in his marriage." "She's done nothing wrong?" "Marcus, she's been helping you steal from Emma's college fund. She's wearing my grandmother's jewelry that you reported as stolen. She's been your accomplice in fraud and theft for months." "That's not how I see it." "Of course it's not. Because you've rewritten reality to make yourself the victim in this situation. But the facts don't change just because they're inconvenient for your narrative." I opened my folder and spread the evidence across our coffee table like a prosecutor making a case. Bank statements showing transfers to cover Marcus's affair expenses. Credit card records documenting jewelry, restaurants, and hotels. Screenshots of Diane's social media posts showing her wearing my grandmother's necklace and Marcus's expensive gifts. "This is what actually happened," I said, pointing to the documentation. "Not the story you've been telling yourself about growing apart and finding happiness with someone else. This is a pattern of theft, fraud, and betrayal that lasted for months." Marcus looked at the evidence spread across our coffee table, and I watched something shift in his expression. The defensive anger was being replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You think you're so smart," he said quietly. "You think you've figured everything out and now you're going to make me pay for not loving you anymore. This isn't about love, Marcus. This is about accountability. No, this is about revenge. You can't handle the fact that I found someone who makes me happy, someone who doesn't spend every day trying to turn me into a different person. I never tried to change you. Everything about you tried to change me. The way you organized our lives, the way you planned our weekends, the way you wanted me to be the perfect suburban father and husband. I felt like I was suffocating, like I was disappearing into this life that you wanted but I never chose. The rewriting of our history was breathtaking. Marcus was transforming 15 years of partnership and mutual decision-making into a narrative of oppression and victimhood. You chose this life, Marcus. You proposed to me. You wanted to buy this house. You wanted to have Emma. You made those decisions freely. I made those decisions when I was 25 years old and didn't know what I really wanted. People change, Sarah. People grow. You can't keep someone trapped in choices they made when they were young and naive. So you decided to lie and steal and cheat instead of having an adult conversation about what you wanted to change. I tried to talk to you about feeling unfulfilled. I tried to tell you that I needed more excitement, more independence. But you dismissed everything I said as a midlife crisis or work stress. This was partially true, and it stung. There had been conversations where Marcus expressed restlessness and dissatisfaction, but he'd framed them in terms of work stress and general life pressure rather than fundamental unhappiness with our marriage. I'd responded with suggestions for date nights and weekend getaways, thinking he needed more romance and relaxation, not realizing he was contemplating an entirely different life. But even if I'd missed some signals, even if I'd been imperfect in my responses to his concerns, it didn't justify months of systematic deception and theft. You're right, I said. I should have listened more carefully when you tried to tell me you were unhappy. I should have taken your concerns more seriously and worked harder to address them. But that doesn't excuse what you did next. Marcus seemed surprised by this admission. He'd expected me to argue, to defend my actions, to refuse responsibility for any part of our marital problems. None of this had to happen the way it did, he said, his voice softening slightly. If you'd been willing to consider that our marriage wasn't working, we could have ended things civilly. We could have figured out a way to separate that didn't destroy both of us. When? When exactly was I supposed to figure out that our marriage wasn't working? While you were lying to me about business trips. While you were stealing from Emma's college fund. While you were giving my grandmother's jewelry to another woman. At what point in your elaborate deception was I supposed to magically understand that you wanted a divorce? The questions hung in the air like accusations, which they were. I was trying to figure out how to end things without hurting you, Marcus said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. By planning my humiliation and abandonment in secret? By making me question my sanity when I asked about your behavior? By systematically stealing from our family to fund your affair? That was your way of protecting me from hurt. Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to our front window, looking out at the street where Emma played with neighbor kids, where we'd walked together as a family countless times, where we'd built a life that he'd been methodically dismantling for months. What do you want from me, Sarah? You want me to grovel? You want me to pretend I'm sorry for finding someone who makes me happy? You want me to come back and pretend we can fix this? I want you to stop pretending you're the victim in this situation. I want you to acknowledge what you've done to Emma and me. And I want you to face the consequences of your choices. He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before, actual hatred. The consequences? You mean destroying my career? Getting Diane fired? Making sure everyone we know sees me as the villain in your version of this story? Those consequences. I mean the natural results of your actions. You stole from our family and committed fraud against your employer. Diane helped you do it and flaunted it on social media. Those aren't consequences I created, they're consequences your actions created. I'm not going to let you destroy my life. You already destroyed your life, Marcus. You destroyed our life. You just didn't expect anyone to notice or care enough to document it. He walked back to the couch and sat down, but his posture was different now. Less angry, more strategic. I recognized this shift. It was the way he looked when he was calculating his next move in a negotiation. What would it take to make this stop? He asked. Make what stop? The emails to our employers. The police reports. This campaign to ruin Diane's career. What would it take for you to just let us get divorced quietly? And there it was, the offer I'd been expecting. Marcus thought this was all a negotiating tactic, a way to gain leverage in our divorce proceedings. You think I'm doing this for money. I think you're doing this to hurt me. And I understand why. I hurt you first. But we both need to think about Emma here. This scorched earth approach isn't good for anyone. I looked at my husband, this man who'd shared my bed for 15 years, who'd held my hand during Emma's birth, who'd once promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. He was trying to negotiate his way out of accountability like this was a business deal gone wrong. Emma, I repeated. You want to talk about what's good for Emma? Of course I do. Emma, whose college fund you emptied to buy jewelry for your mistress. Emma, who's been crying herself to sleep wondering why Daddy doesn't live here anymore. Emma, who asked me yesterday if she did something wrong to make you leave. Marcus flinched at that last detail. For just a moment, I saw a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the man who'd once read bedtime stories and taught our daughter to ride a bike. I never wanted Emma to be hurt by this, he said quietly. But she is hurt. She's devastated. And not because I'm holding you accountable for what you did, because of what you chose to do in the first place. Sarah, please. We can work this out. I'll pay back the money I took from Emma's college fund. I'll return your grandmother's necklace. We can figure out a custody arrangement that works for everyone. But you have to stop trying to destroy my career and Diane's career. Why? The question seemed to confuse him. What do you mean, why? Why should I stop? You didn't stop when you were destroying our family. You didn't consider the consequences to Emma when you were stealing her college money. You didn't think about my feelings when you were mocking me in text messages to your mistress. Why should I consider your feelings now? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to find an argument that would work with this version of me, the version that didn't prioritize his comfort over my own sense of justice. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. Because you're better than this. Am I? Or am I exactly what you made me when you decided to systematically betray everything we'd built together? The recording app on my phone showed that we'd been talking for 4 to 7 minutes. 4 to 7 minutes of my soon-to-be ex-husband trying to manipulate me into accepting the consequences of his actions gracefully, like a good sport who'd lost a game rather than a woman whose life had been deliberately destroyed. I'm going to keep fighting this, Sarah. I'm going to hire the best attorney I can find. I'm going to fight for custody of Emma. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that you've been harassing Diane and trying to sabotage our careers out of spite. Go ahead. The simplicity of my response seemed to surprise him. He'd expected me to be intimidated by threats of legal action and public relations warfare. I have documentation of everything you've done for the past 4 months, I continued. I have recorded evidence of you admitting to theft and fraud. I have proof that you've been lying to your employer and using company resources for personal affairs. I have screenshots of Diane wearing stolen property that you reported to police as a burglary victim. Bring your attorney. Bring your public relations strategy. Let's see how well your version of events holds up under scrutiny. Marcus stood up again, and this time he moved toward the door. The negotiation phase was over. This isn't over, Sarah. No, it's not. But it's not going to end the way you planned, either. He paused at the threshold, and for just a moment, I saw something that might have been regret cross his features. I did love you once, he said, echoing the words he'd spoken the night he left. I need you to know that. Once, I repeated. But not enough to be honest with me when that changed. Not enough to end our marriage before you started another relationship. Not enough to protect Emma from the consequences of your choices. Marcus left without another word, and I sat alone in our living room surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, listening to the silence of our house without him. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like possibility. Upstairs, Emma was sleeping peacefully, trusting that tomorrow would bring the same stability and love that had defined her childhood until recently. She didn't know that her father had just threatened to fight for custody he'd never wanted, or that he was planning to wage a public relations war against her mother. But she would be protected. Whatever else happened, Emma would be protected from the worst of what was coming. I turned off my recording app and sent the audio file to my attorney with a note, additional evidence for the custody evaluation. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting another email, this one to Marcus's biggest client, a family-owned development company that prided itself on traditional values and community investment. The subject line read, Professional conduct concerns regarding Marcus Anderson. Marcus thought he was fighting to protect his future with Diane. What he didn't understand was that I was fighting to protect Emma's future from both of them. And I was just getting started. 3 days after my confrontation with Marcus, the moment I'd been unknowingly building toward finally arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was making Emma's lunch when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Anderson. This is Detective Lisa Rodriguez with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. I'm calling about the theft report you filed regarding stolen jewelry. My heart started racing. Yes. We've located the items in question. We're going to need you to come down to the station to identify them and provide additional information for our investigation. You found my grandmother's necklace. Among other items, yes. This has become part of a larger investigation, and we're going to need to discuss some additional details with you. An hour later, I sat in Detective Rodriguez's office looking at my grandmother's pearl necklace in an evidence bag. The sight of it, something so precious and irreplaceable reduced to evidence of my husband's betrayal, made me feel sick. We recovered this and several other pieces from Ms. Richards's apartment yesterday, Detective Rodriguez explained. She claims they were gifts from her boyfriend, but she couldn't provide purchase receipts or any documentation of ownership. Because Marcus stole them from our house and gave them to her. That's what we need to discuss. Your husband filed the original theft report claiming these items were stolen from his office during a break-in. But your amended report states that he gave them to his girlfriend. Those are two very different crimes. I provided Detective Rodriguez with everything, the text messages, the credit card statements, the photos from Diane's social media showing her wearing my grandmother's jewelry, the documented timeline of Marcus's lies about the supposed office break-in. Mrs. Anderson, I need to ask you directly, are you willing to press charges against your husband for theft and filing a false police report? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Pressing criminal charges against Emma's father would change everything. It would make our divorce proceedings exponentially more complicated. It would likely result in Marcus losing his job and potentially facing jail time. It would destroy any possibility of co-parenting civilly. But it would also mean that actions had consequences. That stealing from your family and lying to police wasn't something you could just negotiate your way out of. Yes, I said. I want to press charges. I left the police station with a victim's rights pamphlet and an appointment to meet with the district attorney's office the following week. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his world was about to get significantly smaller. But the real breaking point came that afternoon, in a way I never could have predicted. I was picking Emma up from soccer practice when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Sarah, this is Diane. I think it's time we talked. Can you meet me at Omelie's on South End at 4 p.m? The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd been helping my husband steal from our family and destroy our marriage wanted to meet for coffee to chat about the situation. I almost didn't go. Every rational part of me knew that meeting with Diane was a terrible idea that could only lead to more drama and complications. But a larger part of me, the part that had been systematically lied to and betrayed for months, needed to look this woman in the eye and understand what kind of person helps destroy a family. Omelie's was crowded with the usual Tuesday afternoon mix of remote workers and stay-at-home parents grabbing caffeine while their children were at school. I spotted Diane immediately, sitting at a corner table with perfect posture and a venti something or other that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was even more beautiful in person than in her social media photos, with the kind of polished perfection that suggested significant time and money invested in maintenance. But there was something else in her expression as I approached, something that looked almost like relief. Sarah, she said, standing to greet me like we were old friends meeting for a casual catch-up. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. What do you want, Diane? I want to clear the air. I think there's been a lot of miscommunication and unnecessary drama, and I thought maybe if we talked directly, we could figure out a way forward that works for everyone. I sat down across from her, studying the woman who'd been living in the margins of my marriage for months. Up close, I could see the slight desperation beneath her composed exterior, the way her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. What kind of way forward did you have in mind? Look, I know you're upset. I understand why you feel betrayed and angry. But Marcus was already unhappy when I met him. Your marriage was already over. I didn't break up a happy home. The revisionist history was almost impressive in its completeness. In Diane's version of events, she was an innocent bystander who'd rescued an unhappily married man from a relationship that was already doomed. When did you meet Marcus? In December, at a hotel industry conference. He was charming and funny and obviously successful. We had an immediate connection. And when did he tell you he was married? Diane hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth she'd been avoiding. He mentioned his family situation was complicated. That's not what I asked. When did he tell you he was married? Sarah, I don't think the timeline matters as much as. It matters to me. When did you know you were sleeping with someone else's husband? The question hung between us like an accusation, which it was. Diane looked around the coffee shop as if she was considering leaving, but then she seemed to make a decision. The first night, she said quietly. He told me he was married but separated, that you were planning to divorce but were waiting until after the holidays for your daughter's sake. Another lie. In December, Marcus and I had been planning Emma's birthday party and discussing vacation plans for the following summer. We'd been intimate and affectionate and completely unaware that our marriage was supposedly over. And you believed that? Why wouldn't I? He seemed miserable when he talked about his home life. He said you'd grown apart, that you wanted different things, that staying together was just making everyone unhappy. But you knew he was still living with me. You knew he was still sharing my bed, still playing father to my daughter, still pretending to be my devoted husband. Sarah, I know how this looks from your perspective. Do you? Do you know what it looks like when your husband comes home smelling like another woman's perfume? Do you know what it feels like to find out that the man you've loved for 15 years has been mocking you in text messages to his mistress? Do you know what it's like to discover that your daughter's college fund has been emptied to buy jewelry for the woman who's helping destroy her family? Diane's composure finally cracked. I never asked him to spend money on me. I never wanted to hurt you or your daughter. But you did hurt us. Every text message you sent, every gift you accepted, every weekend you spent with him while he lied to his family about business trips, you were participating in the destruction of a child's home. That wasn't my intention. What was your intention? What did you think was going to happen? Diane looked down at her coffee, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I thought he was going to leave you. He said he was working on it, that he just needed time to figure out the logistics. I thought we were building toward a real relationship. And now? Now I'm suspended from my job pending an investigation that could end my career. Now Marcus is talking about fighting you in court instead of just getting divorced and moving on. Now everything is falling apart. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered Emma asking if she'd done something wrong to make Daddy leave, and my sympathy evaporated. Good, I said. Diane looked up sharply. What? Good. I'm glad everything is falling apart for you. You helped my husband steal from our daughter. You wore my grandmother's jewelry to parties with your friends. You encouraged him to mock and demean me while I was home taking care of the family he was abandoning. You deserve to have your career destroyed. Sarah, please. You want to know what I think? I think you knew exactly what you were doing. I think you enjoyed being the exciting other woman, the one he chose over his boring wife. I think you got off on the drama and the secrecy and the expensive gifts that someone else's family was paying for. Diane's face flushed red. That's not. And now you're here because it's not fun anymore. Now there are consequences, and you want me to make them go away so you can go back to playing house with my husband without any of the messy complications. I love him. The declaration hung between us like a challenge. Diane straightened her shoulders and looked me directly in the eye with something approaching defiance. I love Marcus, and he loves me. He's happier than he's been in years. We're planning a future together, and nothing you do is going to change that. Are you? Are you really planning a future together? Because Marcus hasn't filed for divorce yet. He's still legally married to me, still living in our house on weekends when Emma's there, still trying to present himself as a devoted father to preserve his image. He's working on it. It's been 4 months since your relationship started. How long does it take to file divorce papers? Diane didn't answer, but I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. You know what I think? I think Marcus likes having both of us. I think he likes being the successful businessman with a stable home life and the devoted wife, and he also likes being the exciting lover with a beautiful girlfriend who makes him feel young and desirable. I think you're not the love of his life, you're his midlife crisis. You're wrong. Am I? Then why isn't he here with you right now? Why isn't he standing up to his angry ex-wife and protecting the woman he supposedly loves? Why is he letting you fight his battles while he tries to negotiate his way out of consequences? The questions hit their target. Diane looked stricken, like she was realizing something she'd been trying not to see. He's trying to protect me from this situation. He's trying to protect himself. You're collateral damage. We sat in silence for several minutes, two women whose lives had become entangled in the worst possible way, surrounded by the gentle hum of coffee shop conversation and the clicking of laptop keyboards. Finally, Diane spoke again, her voice small and defeated. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to stop acting like you're an innocent victim in this situation. And I want you to stay away from my daughter. I've never even met Emma. But you were planning to, weren't you? Marcus was researching schools in Miami. You were going to be her stepmother, help raise the daughter whose college fund you helped empty. Diane's silence was confirmation enough. Emma is 10 years old, I continued. She's smart and sensitive and she's been devastated by her father's abandonment. She doesn't need a replacement mother who helped destroy her family. I never wanted to replace you. But you did want to replace our life. You wanted the successful boyfriend and the ready-made family without any of the work or sacrifice that went into building it. I stood up to leave, but Diane grabbed my wrist. Sarah, wait. What if I ended it? What if I broke up with Marcus and moved away? Would you stop trying to destroy my career? The desperation in her voice was palpable. The confident, successful woman who'd helped my husband systematically betray me was begging for mercy. It's too late for that, I said, gently removing her hand from my wrist. You made your choices, and now you get to live with them. I left Diane sitting alone at the coffee shop table, finally understanding that being the other woman wasn't a romantic adventure, it was a choice with real consequences for real people. But our conversation had given me something I hadn't expected. Clarity about what Marcus was really doing. He wasn't choosing between two women, he was trying to keep both of us while managing the fallout of his lies. That was about to change. I drove home with a new sense of purpose, ready for the next phase of this war. Marcus thought he could play both sides, maintaining his family relationships while pursuing his affair. Diane thought she could help destroy a marriage without facing any real consequences. They were both about to learn that they'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. And tomorrow, everything would finally come to a head in ways none of us were prepared for. The moment that would define everything, the moment I'd been unknowingly building toward for months, came the next day in a way that still makes my hands shake when I remember it. Emma and I were at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. We weren't supposed to be there, but sometimes the universe has its own plan for justice. Emma had left her science project in Marcus's car after their weekend together, and she needed it for school the next morning. It was a detailed model of the solar system that she'd spent weeks crafting, complete with painted styrofoam planets and carefully researched facts about each one. Her teacher, Mrs. Harrison, had made it clear that late projects would receive automatic point deductions, and Emma had been so proud of her work. Marcus had been apologetic about the mix-up when I called him Tuesday morning, but he was already at the airport for another business trip. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I can leave it at the airline customer service desk if you want to drive over and pick it up. I'm flying out in about an hour." It was supposed to be a simple errand. Drive to the airport, pick up Emma's project from customer service, drive home. 20 minutes each way. Problem solved. Emma had begged to come along because she wanted to see airplanes, and because spending time together in the car had become one of our ways of processing the upheaval in our lives. Some of our best conversations happened during drives, when the forward momentum and shared purpose made difficult topics easier to discuss. "Will Dad's plane still be there when we get to the airport?" she asked as we parked in the short-term lot. "Probably not, sweetheart. He said he was leaving in an hour, and it's been 45 minutes since I talked to him." "That's okay. I just want to see where the planes take off." We made our way through the terminal to the customer service desk, where a pleasant woman named Janet helped us retrieve Emma's solar system project. Emma was thrilled to see that her carefully painted Jupiter hadn't been damaged during its unexpected journey. "Can we watch some planes leave before we go home?" Emma asked, clutching her project box. "Just for a few minutes." The airport had a viewing area past security, but there were large windows near the gates that offered a decent view of the tarmac. I checked my watch. We had time, and Emma had been through so much upheaval lately that small requests like this felt important to honor. We found a spot near gate B12 with a clear view of several gates and the planes parked at them. Emma pressed her face to the window, fascinated by the ground crews loading luggage and the planes being pushed back from their gates. "Look, Mom. That one's getting ready to leave." She was pointing at a Delta flight that was indeed preparing for departure. The ground crew was finishing their final checks, and passengers were probably being told to prepare for pushback from the gate. That's when I saw him. Marcus was standing near the gate windows of B14, directly across from where we were watching. He wasn't alone. Diane was with him, along with 2 rolling suitcases and carry-on bags that suggested this wasn't a quick business trip. They were laughing about something, standing close together in the way couples do when they're comfortable with each other. Diane had her hand on Marcus's arm, and he was looking down at her with an expression of genuine affection that I hadn't seen him direct toward anyone in months. My blood ran cold as the implications hit me. This wasn't a business trip. This was a romantic getaway, planned and executed while Marcus was supposedly staying at his brother's house and figuring out how to handle our separation civilly. "Emma," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to go. Now." But Emma wasn't listening. She was still pressed against the window, watching the planes. "Just a few more minutes, Mom? Please." I couldn't tear my eyes away from Marcus and Diane. They looked like any other couple preparing for a vacation, excited, affectionate, completely absorbed in each other. There was no guilt in their body language, no awareness that they were flaunting their affair in a public place where they might be seen by people who knew Marcus was married. And then Marcus's phone rang. I watched him answer it, still smiling from whatever Diane had just said. But his expression changed quickly as he listened to whoever was calling. His smile faded, and he stepped away from Diane, walking closer to the window where he had better cell reception. That's when he saw us. Our eyes met across the terminal space, and I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what had just happened. He'd been caught in another lie, in the most public and undeniable way possible. Marcus said something into his phone and ended the call quickly. He spoke to Diane, who looked in our direction with an expression of alarm. Even from a distance, I could see them having an urgent conversation about what to do. That's when Emma noticed them too. "Mom, is that Daddy?" she asked, pointing toward gate B14. "Who is that lady with him?" My heart shattered. Emma had just seen her father with another woman, obviously preparing to travel together, obviously intimate in a way that made their relationship unmistakable. Before I could figure out how to respond, Marcus was walking toward us, leaving Diane standing alone at his gate. He moved quickly, like he was trying to reach us before the situation could get any worse. Sarah, he said as he approached. Emma, what are you doing here? His voice was strained, desperate. He was still carrying his boarding pass, and I could see the panic in his eyes as he tried to figure out how to explain what Emma had just witnessed. Getting Emma's science project, I said, my voice barely controlled. The one you forgot in your car during your business trip. This isn't what it looks like. The lie was so transparent, so insulting, that it actually made me laugh, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. What does it look like, Marcus? Emma was watching this exchange with the intense focus children develop when they sense something important is happening that they don't quite understand. Daddy, who is that lady you were standing with? She asked again. Marcus looked down at his daughter, and I saw him realize that there was no good way to answer her question. Any explanation would reveal more than he wanted Emma to know, but refusing to answer would be equally damaging. She's a friend from work, he said finally. Are you going on a trip together? We're going to the same conference, Marcus said, the lies coming easier now that he'd committed to them. It's just a coincidence that we're on the same flight. I looked at their matching luggage, their intimate body language, the way Diane was watching our conversation from across the terminal with obvious anxiety. If this was a business conference, it was the most romantic business conference in corporate history. What conference? I asked. Marcus's pause was telling. Real estate development in the Southeast. It's in Miami. How long will you be gone? 3 days. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, which displayed a Google search I'd performed while he was walking over to us. Interesting that there are no real estate conferences in Miami this week, I said. In fact, there are no real estate conferences anywhere in Florida this week. Marcus looked at my phone screen, and I watched him realize that his web of lies had finally become too complex to maintain. That's when Emma, with the devastating honesty that children possess, asked the question that changed everything. Daddy, are you lying to us? The terminal around us seemed to go quiet. Other travelers were beginning to notice our tense family drama playing out near the gate windows. Diane was still watching from across the way, clearly wanting to intervene but not knowing how. Marcus knelt down to Emma's eye level, and I could see him struggling with how much truth to tell his 10-year-old daughter. Emma, sometimes adults have complicated situations. Are you lying? She repeated, her voice smaller but more insistent. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus looked up at me, then back at Emma, and I saw him make a choice that would define their relationship forever. Yes, he said quietly. I am lying to you. Emma's face crumpled. She'd asked for honesty, but she wasn't prepared for what that honesty would reveal. Why? Because I'm doing something that I know is wrong, and I'm trying to protect you from having to know about it. What are you doing that's wrong? Marcus looked at me again, and I saw desperation in his expression. He was asking for help, for guidance about how to explain adult betrayal to a child. But I was done protecting him from the consequences of his choices. Your father is going on vacation with a woman who isn't your mother, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. He's been lying to both of us for months about where he goes and who he's with. Sarah, Marcus started. He's been stealing money from your college fund to pay for trips and gifts for this woman. He gave away my grandmother's necklace, the one that was supposed to be yours someday, to someone he barely knows. Stop, Marcus said, standing up. Emma doesn't need to hear this. Emma needs to hear the truth. She's been blaming herself for you leaving, wondering what she did wrong to make you not want to live with us anymore. She deserves to know that this isn't about her. Emma was crying now, clutching her solar system project against her chest like a shield. The sight of her tears, caused by her father's lies and my need to expose them, made me feel sick. I want to go home, Emma said through her sobs. I want to go home now. We'll go home right now, I told her, putting my arm around her shoulders. But Marcus blocked our path. Sarah, wait. We need to talk about this. This isn't the way. Move. Let me explain to Emma. You've explained enough. Move out of our way. Marcus looked around the terminal, suddenly aware that our family drama was attracting attention from other travelers. A few people had their phones out, and I realized they might be recording this confrontation. That's when he made the choice that I'll never forgive him for. Instead of stepping aside and letting us leave with dignity, instead of acknowledging that he'd caused this situation and accepting responsibility for it, Marcus decided to attack. "This is exactly why I needed to get away from you," he said, his voice rising. "You're manipulative and vindictive, and you're using Emma as a weapon against me." The accusation was so unfair, so completely divorced from reality, that it took my breath away. "I'm using Emma as a weapon? You're the one who brought his mistress to the airport where his daughter might see them. I didn't know you were going to be here. Because you didn't tell us you were leaving. Because you lied about this being a business trip. Because you've been lying about everything for months." Other travelers were definitely watching now. Gate agents were looking in our direction with concern. Airport security was probably being notified about a domestic disturbance near the gates. And Emma was in the middle of it all, crying and confused and traumatized by seeing her parents scream at each other in public. That's when Marcus said the words that broke whatever was left of our family. "Leave this place now, you ignorant woman." The words echoed across the terminal. Other conversations stopped. People turned to stare. Emma's crying became louder, more desperate. Marcus had just screamed at his wife and the mother of his child in front of dozens of strangers, calling me ignorant for having the audacity to confront him about his lies. Emma grabbed my hand with both of hers, her solar system project forgotten on the floor. "Mummy, we need to go. Now," she whispered urgently. "She's gone. We have to leave." At first, I didn't understand what Emma meant. She was looking past Marcus toward gate B14, where Diane had been standing. The gate area was empty now. Diane had apparently boarded her flight or disappeared into a bathroom or moved to a different location. "She's gone," Emma repeated. "The lady is gone. We have to leave." My daughter, at 10 years old, understood something that I was just beginning to grasp. This confrontation was pointless. Marcus had made his choice. He was going on vacation with his mistress while his family fell apart, and no amount of public confrontation was going to change that. I grabbed Emma's science project from the floor and took her hand. "You're right, sweetheart. We're leaving right now." As we walked away, I heard Marcus call after us, "Sarah, we're not done talking about this." But we were done. We were completely, finally done. I grabbed my keys from my purse as we walked toward the exit, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage and heartbreak. Emma held my hand tightly, and I could feel her trembling. "Mummy," she whispered as we reached the sliding doors that led to the parking garage. "I'm scared." "I know, baby. But we're going home now. We're going home, and everything is going to be different from now on." As we stepped outside into the humid Charlotte afternoon, I realized that Emma was right. We did need to leave. Not just the airport. We needed to leave the life where Marcus could humiliate us in public, where we had to witness his betrayal firsthand, where Emma had to see her father choose someone else over his own family. I grabbed my keys, and that's when everything changed. Not just our day, not just our week, but everything. The life I'd been trying to save was officially over. The marriage I'd been fighting for had just died in the most public, humiliating way possible. But something else had been born in that terminal. Something harder and more determined than anything I'd felt before. Marcus thought he could scream at me in public and then fly off on his romantic vacation. He thought Emma would forget what she'd seen, that I would eventually accept his choices and move on quietly. He was wrong. The real war was just beginning. The drive home from the airport was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Emma cried quietly in the passenger seat, still clutching her solar system project, while I tried to process what had just happened and figure out what to do next. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over twice to collect myself. The first time was at a red light where I just sat and let tears fall while Emma reached over to pat my arm with the kind of gentle comfort that broke my heart all over again. "It's okay, Mummy," she said softly. We don't need him if he's going to be mean to us. Out of the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old daughter had processed the situation with more clarity than I'd managed in months of trying to save a marriage that was already dead. The second time I pulled over was in our driveway, where I sat for several minutes trying to figure out how to explain what happened next to Emma. She'd just witnessed her father's complete character transformation in the most public way possible. She'd heard him scream at her mother and seen him choose his mistress over his family. How do you help a child process that level of betrayal? But Emma, as always, was more resilient than I gave her credit for. Mom, she said as we sat in our driveway, is Daddy coming home tonight? No, sweetheart. Daddy's on that airplane with his friend, remember? Good, Emma said with fierce certainty. I don't want him to come home if he's going to yell at you like that. We went inside, and I helped Emma set up her solar system project in her room while we waited for the storm that was surely coming. Marcus would be in the air for the next few hours, but once he landed in Miami with Diane, he'd start trying to manage the fallout from our airport confrontation. I was right. My phone started ringing at 8:47 p.m. Sarah, we need to talk about what happened today. Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, the reasonable businessman trying to clean up an unfortunate misunderstanding. The transformation from the man who'd screamed at me in the airport 6 hours earlier was complete. We don't need to talk about anything. Emma shouldn't. The phone call that changed everything came at 6:23 a.m. on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the airport incident. I was making Emma's breakfast when Detective Rodriguez called with news that made my hands shake as I poured orange juice. Mrs. Anderson, I wanted to let you know that we've made arrests in your case. Your husband and Ms. Richards were taken into custody this morning at Miami International Airport as they attempted to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands. They'd been planning to flee the country. What are the charges? Multiple counts of theft, fraud, filing false police reports, and money laundering. The DA's office has also added conspiracy charges based on the evidence we found on their devices. Mrs. Anderson, they had detailed plans to liquidate assets and disappear. You may have saved yourself from losing everything by acting when you did. After I hung up, I sat at our kitchen table and cried, not from sadness this time, but from relief. The nightmare was finally over. Emma found me there when she came downstairs for breakfast, still in her pajamas with her hair sticking up in every direction. Mom? What's wrong? You look happy and sad at the same time. I'm happy, sweetheart. Some people who did bad things to our family are finally going to face consequences for what they did. Emma studied my face with the intuitive wisdom that had gotten us through the darkest months of our lives. Does this mean Daddy won't be able to hurt us anymore? The question broke my heart and mended it simultaneously. Emma had understood, even at 10 years old, that her father's actions were hurting us. She'd been protecting herself emotionally in ways I was only beginning to recognize. Yes, baby. He won't be able to hurt us anymore. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Marcus and Diane were extradited back to North Carolina within a week, and their attempts to liquidate assets and flee the country had actually strengthened the prosecution's case significantly. Marcus's attorney, the best criminal defense lawyer his remaining money could buy, tried to negotiate a plea deal that would minimize his jail time. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the DA's office had no interest in going easy on someone who'd stolen from his own child's college fund. The divorce proceedings were equally swift. Marcus's criminal charges had eliminated any leverage he might have had in negotiating custody or asset division. The court awarded me primary custody of Emma, the house, and the majority of our remaining assets. Marcus would be allowed supervised visitation with Emma after his release from prison, if she chose to see him. Emma, with the resilience that continues to amaze me, adapted to our new reality better than I'd dared hope. She started therapy with a wonderful counselor who specialized in helping children process parental abandonment and betrayal. She threw herself into school activities and friendships with an energy that suggested she was finally free from the stress of living in a house full of secrets and lies. I'm proud of you, Mom, she told me one evening as we were doing homework together at our kitchen table. You didn't let the bad people win. The bad people. That's how Emma had categorized her father and Diane, not as complex adults who'd made terrible choices, but simply as people who'd chosen to do bad things to her family. The sentencing hearing was held on a cold Tuesday morning in February. I sat in the courtroom gallery with Emma beside me, both of us dressed in our best clothes because this moment felt important enough to mark with ceremony. Marcus looked smaller in his Orange County Jail uniform, diminished in a way that went beyond the weight he'd lost during his months in custody. When he stood before the judge, I saw none of the confidence and charisma that had once attracted me to him. What was left was a middle-aged man who destroyed everything good in his life for a fantasy that had evaporated the moment real consequences appeared. The judge sentenced Marcus to 4 years in state prison for theft and fraud, with a possibility of parole after 18 months. Diane received 2 years, most of which would be served concurrently with her sentence in Florida for related charges. When it was over, when the bailiff had led Marcus away and the courtroom had emptied, Emma and I walked out into the February sunshine holding hands. "What happens now, Mom?" Emma asked as we walked to our car. "Now we build our new life. Just us, exactly the way we want it." And that's exactly what we did. I used the settlement money to start my own graphic design business, something I dreamed about for years but never had the courage to pursue. Working from home gave me the flexibility to be present for Emma while building something that was entirely mine. Emma blossomed in ways that made me realize how much her father's presence had been constraining her natural personality. She joined the debate team, started taking piano lessons, and developed a passion for astronomy that began with that solar system project and grew into a genuine scientific curiosity about the universe. We created new traditions to replace the ones that had been tainted by Marcus's betrayal. Sunday morning pancakes became our special time to plan the week and talk about whatever was on Emma's mind. We started taking annual mother-daughter trips to places we'd always wanted to see. We adopted a rescue dog named Luna who became Emma's constant companion and the family member who loved us unconditionally. The house that had once felt like a stage set for a marriage that was falling apart became a real home again. We painted Emma's room purple, her current favorite color, converted Marcus's old office into a reading nook, and filled every corner with evidence of our actual life rather than the performance of family happiness we'd been maintaining. I even started dating again, though carefully and with Emma's input every step of the way. When I met David, a kind, divorced father of 2 who coached Emma's soccer team, Emma was the one who suggested I accept his invitation for coffee. "He's not like Daddy," she told me after observing them interact for several weeks. "He doesn't pretend to be different people for different situations." That observation, from a 12-year-old girl who'd learned to read adult deception at a younger age than anyone should have to, meant more to me than any romantic gesture could have. Marcus was released on parole after serving 22 months of his sentence. True to the court's orders, any visitation with Emma had to be supervised and required her consent. She chose not to see him. "I don't want to," she told me when the victim's advocate called to discuss visitation arrangements. "He hurt you, he hurt me, and he never said he was sorry. I don't need that in my life." I didn't push her to reconsider. Emma had earned the right to make that decision for herself. Marcus sent letters from prison, long, rambling attempts at explanation and apology that revealed he still didn't truly understand what he'd done wrong. He talked about being unhappy and feeling trapped, about how he'd never meant to hurt anyone, about how he hoped someday Emma would understand that adults sometimes make mistakes. I read them all, then filed them away in case Emma ever wanted to see them when she was older. But I never responded. Marcus had lost the right to explanations and forgiveness when he chose to scream at his wife in an airport terminal rather than take responsibility for his actions. Diane served her full sentence and moved back to Atlanta after her release. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd struggled to find work in hospitality after her conviction, that her social media presence had been scrubbed clean of any trace of her former life, that she'd essentially disappeared from public view. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, but no sympathy either. She'd made her choices with full knowledge of their impact on a child's life, and consequences were simply the natural result of those choices. 3 years after Marcus was sentenced, Emma and I were having our usual Sunday morning pancakes when she asked a question that showed how much she'd grown. "Mom, do you think Daddy thinks about us?" "Probably," I said, flipping a pancake. "Why do you ask?" I was wondering if he's sad about missing my life. Like, I made honor roll again, and I'm starting high school next year, and I have friends and hobbies, and I'm basically becoming a whole person without him being part of it. She said it matter-of-factly, without anger or sadness, just as an observation about the natural consequences of his choices. Does that make you sad? I asked. Emma considered the question while drowning her pancakes in syrup. Not really. I used to think I wanted him to be sad about it, like revenge or something. But now I think I just want him to understand that actions have consequences, and he chose to miss my whole childhood for someone who didn't even really love him. The wisdom in that statement took my breath away. At 14, Emma understood something about accountability and personal responsibility that many adults never grasp. I'm proud of the person you're becoming, I told her. I'm proud of us, she replied. We could have been victims forever, but we chose to build something better instead. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in our living room with Luna curled up beside me and reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The woman who'd found those boarding passes in Marcus's pocket felt like a different person, someone who'd been smaller, more accommodating, more willing to accept less than she deserved. The woman I'd become was stronger, clearer about her values, and absolutely unwilling to accept abuse or betrayal as the price of maintaining a relationship. Emma had learned those lessons too, watching how I'd handled the worst crisis of our lives. I pulled out my laptop and began typing. Asterisk if you're watching this from your kitchen table, your bedroom, or wherever you find yourself questioning everything you thought was true, I want you to know that you're stronger than you realize. The person who's lying to you, stealing from you, or betraying your trust is counting on you to accept their version of reality, to prioritize their comfort over your own truth, to make their consequences as minimal as possible. Asterisk. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to be reasonable about unreasonable treatment. You don't have to be understanding about deliberate cruelty. You don't have to protect someone from the natural results of their own choices. Asterisk. It took me 15 years to learn that lesson, but once I did, everything changed. Not just for me, but for my daughter, who learned that people who love you don't lie to you, steal from you, or scream at you in public places. Asterisk. Marcus thought he could manage his way out of consequences, that he could charm and negotiate and manipulate his way back to a life where his actions didn't matter. He was wrong. Asterisk. Sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become someone else entirely. Someone who documents everything, who refuses to be gaslit, who understands that love without respect is just manipulation with better marketing. Asterisk. Emma and I built a life that's completely ours now. A life where we're valued and respected and never have to wonder if the person we love is lying to us. Where we can trust each other completely because we've both learned what trustworthiness actually looks like. Asterisk. If my story helps even one person recognize the signs I missed, if it helps someone understand that they deserve better than what they're accepting, then sharing these painful details will have been worth it. Asterisk. Thank you for following our journey. Thank you for your comments and support and for sharing your own stories of survival and recovery. You've reminded me that we're not alone in this, that betrayal and recovery are part of the human experience, and that there's incredible strength in refusing to be diminished by someone else's choices. Asterisk. Emma and I are proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply building a life so good that you forget why you needed revenge in the first place. Asterisk. I posted the video that night, the final chapter in a story that had consumed 2 years of our lives but had ultimately taught us everything we needed to know about resilience, integrity, and the kind of love that actually protects rather than simply claiming to. The comments poured in from people around the world who'd found strength in our story, who'd recognized their own experiences in our journey, who'd learned to value themselves enough to demand better treatment. But the comment that mattered most came from Emma, who'd apparently been reading over my shoulder as I typed. "That's exactly right, Mom," she said, giving me a hug that smelled like teenage shampoo and possibility. "We're not the same people we were when this started. We're so much better." She was right. We weren't the same people. We were stronger, wiser, and completely unwilling to accept less than we deserved from anyone ever again. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not the criminal convictions or the divorce settlement or even the justice that had finally been served. The real victory was becoming the kind of people who could never be victimized again. Marcus had tried to destroy our family, but in the end, he'd only destroyed himself. Emma and I had emerged from the wreckage stronger than we'd ever been, with a bond forged by surviving the worst together and choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes. We'd won. Not because we'd defeated our enemies, but because we'd refused to let their choices define our lives. And that, I thought as I watched Emma do her homework at our kitchen table while Luna slept at her feet, was the best possible ending to a story that had begun with such heartbreak. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about becoming so strong, so clear about your worth, so unwilling to accept less than you deserve, that the people who try to diminish you become irrelevant to your happiness. Marcus could keep his regrets and his prison sentences and his ruined reputation. Emma and I had something better, a life built on truth, respect, and the kind of love that actually protects the people it claims to cherish. We had won. Asterisk if you found strength in Sarah and Emma's journey, remember, you deserve relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine love. You deserve better than anyone who asks you to accept their betrayal gracefully. And you're stronger than you know. Asterisk.